We've been about this work: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, shared through the voices of a white woman and a black man. We bring lived experiences. We have pursued D&I progress for most of our professional lives. We use Crazy and the King to cover news, tips from colleagues, and host incredible guests. Listeners, count on Julie and I to transparently drive the conversation. We thank you for rocking with us. Check it. Julie, kick off the show.
Welcome to Crazy and the King.
So listen, I actually have to be just a tad bit quiet because those of you who are listening, you have no idea that I'm sitting in an office in New York, and the people in the company, they're not used to a person making a bunch of goddamn noise. They're just not used to, it's kind of real boring, like the entire office, white furniture. It's almost like everything in here is, it's black and white, but it's so quiet, Jay. Anyway, how are you?
You know what? I am wonderful.
Okay.
Sitting at the new place in Portugal. I've been here, 2 weeks now? It's a dream. Living the dream. That's all I can tell you.
Living the dream. And you are not by yourself. A lot of folks, want to have that dual citizenship and, spread their wings a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. I was getting my eyebrows done the other day, and I was talking to the lady who was doing it. She was like, my God, there's all these Americans here all of a sudden. Like, what the hell is happening there? And I'm like, let's just not talk about it. Just know that, we'll come hang out, bring some money in, do that thing. So yes, there's a lot of movement. We're hearing from more and more people every day. But you know what? I'm especially thankful for you for taking our in-team kind of thought that we've had for the last couple of years and really taking it to fruition. And I don't know if it was on purpose, but you gave me pretty much the entirety of the month of October off from the mic, knowing that, it is the busiest month of the year for me for disability solutions. And I am a person with a disability. I don't know if that was in your thought process, but I appreciate you for that. And we had some great freaking content.
We did. It wasn't on purpose. We did. And you're welcome. So all of that. So we did. It wasn't on purpose. We did have some great content, and you're absolutely welcome. Nothing wrong with getting like a 1 month break that is unexpected, that allows you to sort of pour that energy into a different part of your professional and your personal life. And I want to just send a special thanks out to Yvette Pegues for kicking us off. I know that she was a bit nervous, but she had some incredible announcements and things that she's doing in the disability community. I want to also thank Amanda Kirby, Theo Smith from over in the UK for jumping in and hopping on that beat and giving us a little bit of that CATK love. And then last but not least, Amanda Burris. It's funny because when I was responding to Amanda Kirby, Amanda Burris popped up in my email, auto pop, and I'm like, this is the wrong person. And then I was thinking about somebody else with the last name Kirby over in New Zealand. I'm sorry. I was just like really bugging a little bit, but we got it all right. I think that all of them, for it being their first time, not a whole lot of prep, for all of them hopping on and just really contributing to the conversation last month. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'm very appreciative that you and I were able to agree that we would take a chance and do something that we had never done before.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I was super nervous about it. I don't know if I've said that on the air, but I was super nervous about it. And you know what, I'm kind of kicking myself in the ass right now because you're 100% right. Everybody did an amazing job. It's hard to give up my seat, just hanging out with you and doing our thing. So that was a little bit of it. But also what a fantastic kind of spread for our listeners to understand what disability brings to the table. Some of just the everyday people out there doing their thing, making a difference, living their life with a disability, being successful and rocking their game, whatever that is. And that's what I think, as I went back and listened to all the shows, all of the guests were great. I'm super proud of Amanda. She did a fantastic job. And what I realized is this is where we need to see people with disabilities just like that, right? Just like that in this, hey, everyday life, hey, doing our thing. It's not just Julie saying all the time that people with disabilities are out there rocking the world and doing things all the time, but we are. And we had many very good examples last month now, it's November, showing what disability employment and success should look like.
Absolutely. So let's hop into just a couple of stories and then get to our conversation for the week. Number one, I think at the top of most headlines, most newsletters, at least since last Thursday, the biggest headline happens to be that Elon took over Twitter. And I got to tell you, I am going to tell you, it was no big deal to me. Honestly, okay. I felt like, whether it's Elon or somebody different, they're going to do within the organization whatever it is that they decide to do. These are billionaire problems. It's not my problem. I'm not trying to take over Twitter. I'm trying to use the platform as I use other platforms in a way to get out a message that I think is important. But one thing struck me. Over the weekend, I don't know exactly what day it was. It could have been Friday of last week, could have been Saturday or Sunday of the weekend, or even earlier this week. But there was a rise in posts around anti-Semitism, homophobia. I want to say posts that were racially charged. I don't know if they necessarily said the N-word, Jay. I don't want to spread misinformation. But what I do remember seeing is that there was a rise in negative, toxic, dangerous language in the days of him taking over. How'd you feel? Did you feel anything? Did you care?
Yeah, I care. One, Twitter is the only social media that I still like. We've had this talk many times. I just had to take a lot of social media breaks, and I've gotten out of the habit of it for the most part. But Twitter, I really enjoy. It's like a way to connect with people who I would never otherwise sort of have the opportunity to sort of hear from on a really personal basis, especially, just the really smart people in our political world. And I honestly didn't think that the deal would go through. I don't know if you listened to the Pivot podcast with Scott Galloway and
Kara
Swisher. Thank you for saving my ass, as always. But they've been talking about this for months. And really, what Elon did first was he manipulated the stock. So I own in mutual fund index funds Twitter stock. He manipulated the price of that to his own end. He won't pay for that. That's a problem number one. Problem really number two is that he was backed financially because he had to take on debt to make this purchase happen. So he's backed financially by a Saudi prince, which means now that we have a foreign government who partially owns an American social media company. That I have a problem with. And then, of course, the last thing that you speak of is then his sort of I'm not going to moderate content approach, right? So it's really just sort of a free-for-all of free speech, which is then resulting in what you talked about, which is the increase in anti-Semitism, LGBTQ, anti-trans language, homophobia, and I believe a dramatic increase in the use of the N-word. I believe you're right about that. As people who have otherwise been kicked off the platform are rejoining from, far right platforms such as, Truth Social, Reddit, Parler, whatever the fuck they are, things. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's that big of a deal, but there are things about it that like seriously piss me off, and that this is a platform that I really, really love to use, and it's going to be changing dramatically, and I don't think it's going to be changing for the best.
Yeah, so you raised some very, very good points. I have not listened to the podcast there, Scott and Kara's podcast, in quite some time, but I am very fond of both of those personalities. I will also say that I like the points that you raised around the foreign government, that governmental entity or individual being behind, such a prominent U.S. brand, one that we use to, well, actually one that's used globally. I think about Arab Spring and how it ignited a movement, how it supported so much of the uprising and the vocal activism, if you will, for a variety of different things. So it is a platform that I too appreciate. I don't see Twitter as like an Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn. I do see it as being a very different platform. So I can appreciate the balance that you give to my statement of whatever. I still feel the whatever, but I also embrace and feel the points that you've raised. And what I think is going to happen in this, whether or not it's Elon firing a number of high-ranking executives and others, whether he continues to throttle employees' access to content moderation tools, whether he replatforms some of the individuals that have been kicked off. I believe in the end, and I don't know what the end looks like, but I believe over the next 12 to 18 months, a lot is going to be revealed to those of us who care about the platform, use the platform. And I think that 18-month mark or so, we might see the rise of a couple of competing platforms, not any of the ones that you mentioned, but some very new entrants into the marketplace. So what I think is going to happen is good.
The most important question related to Twitter is, and listeners, if you do not know, my podcast partner is blue check verified, kind of a badass. Will you pay to keep it? Is it important enough for you to spend that $240 a year? Nope.
Not 240, not 60, not 24. I wouldn't even pay $2 a month to be verified. The only way that I would pay to be verified, and I mean this sincerely, I would actually pay to be verified. And this is going to roll into our next story. I would pay to be verified if Twitter had a verification policy for every single profile on the platform. If they were collecting driver's license and identifying information, like I had to go through to get blue check verified so that I knew that it wasn't a bot and it was a person and that they could be identified and in some ways pinpointed for some of their nefarious behavior, I would pay all day to be blue check verified. I'd pay $240. I'd pay $360. I would pay, but until they get rid of some of the bots and the fake accounts, no, I'm not paying for it.
There you go. You heard it here first, Elon.
So it actually brings, it goes into the story we have around Texas and facial recognition becoming a way of life. And I'm not going to go into the full story in part because I'm working on a laptop and I have limited window space, but it's in Fast Company. You can look at the article. Here's the reason why I shared the article. There were people that were talked about in the article, Julie, that were against facial recognition becoming so prominently used in everyday life. In this instance, in the beginning, it was a person or a couple trying to rent an apartment. And the apartment complex wanted them to take a picture on their phone, and they just weren't feeling it. Here's my question. I believe we can't stop that train. So do you feel like this facial recognition journey that is really like just looming over the mountain. Like it literally is looming over the mountain. Do you feel like this technology is going to have positive or more negative impact on our daily lives?
I go back and forth. I mean, I think you're like after, and I'm going to say this from an American purview first, and then try to give it a more global perspective, is after 9/11, we put the Patriot Act into law, in which we created, and I think not fully, as a citizen who lived it, as you did, not fully recognizing that we were in fact allowing at least the gateway for the creation of a surveillance state. Now, is a surveillance state good or bad? If we look at London, if we look at, different parts of Europe that have heavy use of like CCTV and those kind of things, where crime is lower than it is here. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know. What I know is as Americans, we've created a power vacuum in which that kind of technology and that kind of surveillance is going to be able to thrive. And when you pair that with really unfettered capitalism that we have in this country, and the conveniences that surveillance state is going to create, I think that ship has sailed. I think that, I like to look at my phone and have it see me. I like to get on the plane with my Clear and my biometric scan, all of those things. And do I really think about very often anything other than giving my DNA away to like a 23andMe, which I will never do? The rest has just sort of, just happened.
Yeah, I did. I signed up like you for Clear. And then when the pandemic hit, I started to see the efficacy of Clear beyond the airport. And then, lo and behold, they started to accept it at some of the conference and in-person events that I was attending or attended by others. And so I tend to not be a person who is reticent about embracing new technology. I don't know. I think if we can get this facial recognition to, like for instance, this camera that's on my laptop right now, I purchased it for one reason and one reason only, so that I wouldn't have to unhook the audio and video equipment that's in my office. I'm trying to, just put it there and leave it there and not move it around, put it on planes and all that other stuff. But this camera is actually supposed to follow me. Now, I don't know if it's following me because I haven't done anything, but on your side, is it moving?
Oh, yeah, it's moving. Oh, yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, see, I can't even tell. On my side, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So I think that personally, I like to embrace new technology when I think that it will advance efficiency, it will advance efficacy, it will advance connection and humanity. So even though the ship has sailed, I'm happy to be on the ship. I just want to make sure that we are, as individuals, not afraid to govern when governing needs to be done. That if in fact we can tell that these organizations, these companies, these enterprises, if they're misusing our data, they're misdeploying technology, that we step in and we step in immediately. We don't allow it to become some erected tool in our day-to-day life where it's hard for us to strip it out and we can't move forward. Kind of like the too big to fail. Remember that whole conversation around too big to fail? I just, any technology we stood up in a way that if we pull it out, or that if we try to now regulate or do something that is for the better good, for the greater good, that it disrupts our lives totally. That I want us to try to avoid.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, kind of one of the pieces I took away from the article is just, it's the ability to opt out. And I think that's one of my big problems is, if I opt in, I choose to use Clear. I choose to give that information to the Clear company. But I shouldn't have to use it to be able to purchase an apartment. There should be other ways of verifying my identity, which we've done for, how many ever dozens and dozens of years. And we should be allowed to opt out of that kind of data collection. And not only should we have the ability to opt out, but we should have sort of first right of refusal in terms of like when it pops up, you can opt in, you can opt out. Not I have to go find a thing and opt out and do all that kind of stuff. And the other piece is certainly around facial recognition, around the criminal justice system. That is proven again and again to be problematic, and we don't have anything close to the type of accuracy that we need to make that even remotely doable at this point.
Yeah. And the last story that we have before we go to our break, it's just a really quick mention, but I am really, really excited that the Wharton School of, well, it looks like the management department, I don't want to say the Wharton School of Business, but the Wharton Management Department is going to offer in the academic school year of 2023-2024, they're going to offer an MBA in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Major. It's a major academic announcement for me, which really will connect us to part of what we're going to talk about after the break. But I thought that this was beautiful. Love that Wharton, in all of its prominence and glory around building B-school students and propelling people to Wall Street and power corridors, that they said, wait a minute, we have to do even more around diversity and inclusion. Stephanie Curry, who has been awesome, she's been a great friend. Just to know that even with her presence, the work that she's doing, others are doing, that the school said we have to do even more. I thought that this was great.
Yeah, it's a good find. It's interesting. I'll be very interested to see how it plays out and if other schools adopt.
And we will go to a break, but what I want you all to know before we do the break is, why do Julie and I talk about Twitter and Elon Musk and content moderation? And why do we talk about facial recognition and the criminal justice system and how it impacts our personal and professional lives? And why do we highlight Wharton starting a academic major around DEI? Because they're all important. We have grown in how we put our stories together, that we're not only talking about DEI specific stories, because we know that indirectly these stories impact how we pursue DEI in our personal and professional lives. So stick with us. We'll be right back. So this week in a flash, the Fed's proposed rate hike may spur signal that a downturn is inevitable, and the CEO of Redfin says that home prices are falling faster than they did in 2008. And apparently, we have Airbnb Joes and Josettes, institutional investors, and iBuyers to blame. Oil companies are posting record profits. Early voting is up, way up, and a man in southern China is concealing his $30 million lottery jackpot from his wife and his child, fearing, Jay, that the winnings will make both of them lazy. I don't know if you caught it, but our jackpot here last week was $1 billion. Over at the Supreme Court, some justices pressed for an end to race-conscious university admissions as they heard challenges to affirmative action early in the week. And I think some of the members of the Supreme Court should probably enroll in that class from Wharton in 2023-2024. And finally, if that isn't enough to ponder, apparently there is now a thing called the pink tax. The pink tax is a return to office tax where women also face paying more for clothes, makeup, and dry cleaning, paying more than men. That's this week's In a Flash.
All right, so I just have the question from In a Flash, which I love, by the way. Did you just learn about the pink tax, or were you just updating the pink tax?
So I thought about that. It's so interesting that you asked me that, because I said, did we talk about that before? And I didn't do a quick, Google Drive search like I would normally do. But I said, but then the immediate question after that one was, but haven't women always paid more money for clothes, for makeup, for hair than men have? Like, why is there a new? You know what I think it is, Jay? I just think that I think that there are more people working hard to trend, go viral. So let's come up with this new phrase, like whoever created the War for Talent, 1996 or so. Whoever created the Great Resignation or the Great Reset. I think people are always searching for something that allows them to get a bit of notoriety. So I knew about the pink tax. I may not have called it the pink tax, but women in my life have always paid more for these things than I do.
Yes, we pay a higher tax many times on female goods like tampons, all of those things. We pay a higher tax for, or a higher price for pink razors, women's razors versus men's razors. All of those things have existed. And now as we do return to work and have to revamp those wardrobes, all of those things are still more expensive for us to do. So excellent call out.
So this week, last week, there was a tweet that caught my attention, and I'm going to actually read the tweet. It was regarding Penn State. The Penn State University is scrapping plans to open up a Center for Racial Justice. The plan was actually announced in 2021 in response to, of course, George Floyd, the summer of uprising, and some of the other things that were happening. But it was to highlight how the school has failed to hire and retain Black faculty members. The tweet was from an individual by the name of Wyatt Massey. He's at News 4 Mass on Twitter. News, the number 4 Mass on Twitter. He says Penn State has formally scrapped plans to establish a Center for Racial Justice, a key proposal in the wake of 2020 protests. This morning, the morning that the tweet was sent out, President Benda Pudi told the group searching for the center's director that Penn State would not fund the effort. Now, we'll get back to that. So my question, how do you feel when academic institutions, corporations, nonprofit entities, people who have made a demonstrative stand that DEI is important, racial, social justice is important. How do you feel when they backtrack on those declarative statements, those demonstrative positions? And just to be fair, let me not tease out the audience. What the president said is that they're going to take those allocated funds and reinvest them in existing work that is already being done. With an asterisk. That's my asterisk, not yours. That's not an article asterisk. But how do you feel when they backtrack from those demonstrative statements and positions?
I mean, it immediately when you were reading the tweet and we were prepping for the show, I thought of Tim Sackett, who joined us, earlier this year, and we asked him, are companies backsliding in their D&I commitments now that we are, 2+ years out from the murder of George Floyd? And his answer was an unequivocal and loud yes, they are. Yeah. And I think, that's my first gut reaction is, things are bad and something terrible happens and we take action and we have that gut. But when it comes time to put your money where your mouth is, that money is reallocated, reprioritized in a potentially, and again, I'm just sort of talking out loud, less than transparent way than a Center for Racial Justice would have been on Penn State's campus. Now, with that being said, I think that there's a lot of academic work that gets done around social justice, racial justice. And and we have a lot of very, very smart people. So if we're going to use the money for making sure that we are actually, creating more diverse scholarship programs, initiatives, making sure that we're retaining and paying Black and brown talent at the level that is equitable to their white peers, that we are creating more accessible buildings on campus, that we're creating more accessible technology, more accessible learning, mediums for students and faculty for disabilities. Like, that to me is a really good use of that money. And so, maybe next time when we start thinking about those commitments, we can see sort of the reality of being reactive versus proactive. Does Penn State have a good DEIB strategy from its top to its bottom, right? Or when things happen, like the murder of George Floyd, do they all of a sudden wake up and go, oh shit, we haven't done anything. Let's make this really big promise that we then don't keep. Instead of having, D&I that moves and lives and is a part of everything that Penn State does, which again, at least at my gut, would be probably a much better use of the money than sort of the high profile building, downtown, and making that move for additional academic work. I don't know. I literally just thought of that while I was talking. It could be all wrong.
Well, so I teased it a tad bit. Well, I shared, that Penn State had been operating, or at least this last year, operating at about $100 million deficit. I've seen a few different numbers in some of the articles that I researched or read prior to our recording. But the point is, all of the articles suggested that Penn State they are cash deficient at this particular point. So the piece that sort of stood out for me, you touched on it, is, are we being transparent? So I tried to be fair, because I said, when I go in and consult and work with an organization, I always tell them I have to start with the discovery. I need to see where you all are so that we can baseline how we decide to stand up programming and efforts to move forward. We have to have some degree of measurement and revelation, then we can begin to journey towards better. What most of these articles said to me, Jay, was that they were going to, some said we're double down on our efforts and we'll take the money that we were going to allocate, which is somewhere between $1 and $3 million. We're going to, for this new center, we'll take that $1 and $3 million and pour it into existing programming. But then I read one article and I said, is one enough for me to put the red flag up? Yeah, it is. One article I read, it said, well, we have to uncover what we are doing. And I said, as the president of the institution, how is it that either you can be quoted as saying we have to uncover what we are doing behind the decision being made to say we're just going to scrap the Center for Racial Justice? If I'm going to get out and say I'm backtracking off of this declaration that we made, I'm going to backtrack and we're going to put our money where I need to already know, well, what are we already doing? It logically didn't make any sense, which is the reason why I think people like Bernice King, chief executive of the Martin Luther King Center, says, listen, we got a problem with this. Diversity efforts are not the same as working to end racism. I think it's a reason why Black faculty members at Penn State are complaining. Last year, I believe that the report says that African Americans accounted for about 3.1% of faculty in 2020. 3.1%. I will tell you something else that I can't really elaborate on because it's not my story. I heard the story riding around in the city a couple of weeks ago, but a former or a Penn alum talked about when they were attending the university, there was the death of at least one black person, a body found on the campus, and how the campus just pretty much tried to sweep it up under the rug. And the context of that was around Penn State has a longer history of not doing what needs to be done around equity and inclusion and representation. This is not a newer history, it's a longer history. And so for the current president to scrap it, but then say we need to do a discovery to see what we're doing, I think that's a little bit of putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I mean, it shows the, I'll say it, I don't know, maybe too harshly, but it shows the disingenuousness of the center in the first place, because if you don't know what's wrong and you haven't spent the time to figure that out, right? I mean, this is what you and I do for a living on the regular, is figure out what's broken and then build systems to correct that. And so, you know, now to say, oh, we're going to go back and we're going to study and discover what is broken. Well, you know, you've got 100 years of history and 2 years since the death of George Floyd to have been working on that before you made this decision to cut the center. I will say, though, I would like to get your opinion a little bit more on the Bernice King statement, diversity efforts are not as the same as working to end racism, which I 100% agree with. They're not the same. But sometimes I feel like statements like that discourage good. They discourage TA leaders, DEI leaders, HR leaders, CEOs from taking action because it's not enough. And what we really need is people who are willing to do what's necessary to build into the systems that they control, that they can influence, to start to increase diversity, which will work towards ending racism. And so sometimes I find that kind of language a little bit discouraging, and not disrespectful, obviously, to Mrs. King in any shape or form. But it just sort of lands oddly with me when we think about the work that has to be done and how it has to be systematic. And that has to be, you know, there have to be diversity efforts to actually end racism, I think.
So what's your question to me, though? Because I hear your position. So what's your question to me?
I don't know if there's a question so much as I guess I just made a statement and wondering, you know, sort of your gut, your reaction to it. Yeah.
So, you know, when I read the statement, and when I read statements of that sort, I tend to think about the trouble that I cannot remember her name now. She's the former DEI officer for Apple. I think it's Denise Young Smith, if I'm not mistaken, back in like 2015 or 16, something like that. She was in Brazil and she made a statement around 14 or so white men being in a room, and that really is diversity and inclusion, if I'm not mistaken. I'm paraphrasing. And I felt like that was problematic around, this is a black woman saying that 14 men being in a room is diversity and inclusion. I felt like that was problematic because I felt like it gave cover and grace to individuals not willing to push hard enough to increase diversity, to increase inclusion and representation. And so when I hear a statement like Bernice King's, I hear it the same way that I read Denise, the same thing. I feel like we sometimes can flirt with diversity and think that we are making progress when we are not tearing down and trying to deconstruct these systems of oppression and prejudice and just these barriers that prevent us from really making true progress. So personally, I didn't see an issue in the statement. However, I can embrace, I can sit with what you are saying as well, because here's the beauty in that. The beauty, and there are so many times that people that are younger than you and I, Jay, not excluding you from that youngness, if you will. But there are times when people will put stuff up on social media and they're like calling it out, like this is the problem. And I literally will sit there and read it for 2, 3, 4 minutes. Like, I don't see what's wrong. Like, I don't see the issue. And it'll be a long thread of people commenting. And I'm trying, not necessarily trying to agree, if you will. I'm literally just trying to see what is the issue. So I can live with your observation around the sentiment of how sometimes a statement like that might push people away from really participating and being a part of how we create a better journey. So thank you for that. And what I will say is that Penn State, do better.
Yes.
Penn State, just simply do better. We need you to, you are a well-recognized academic institution. And like Wharton earlier in this episode, you and the statement that would have been made by standing up that Center for Racial Justice, Penn State, I need you to do better.
Yep. Transparently better.
Transparently.
And just as we close out this segment before we go to her voice, didn't want to miss your call out in a flash about the arguments that are happening this week in front of the Supreme Court about ending affirmative action at the university level with cases against both Harvard and University of North Carolina. Yep, UNC, thank you. And very, very likely then later this next year, you and I will be talking about the overturning of affirmative action by SCOTUS. And that probably deserves its own historical Crazy and the King episode as we lead up to those. But if you haven't followed those arguments, check them out. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, is making some compelling statements, and you're starting to hear really where the other side sits, and we're likely to lose that regulation mid next year.
You got it. We'll be right back. Her Voice segment is where we amplify women that are making moves. So this week, up first, we have Amber Coleman Mortal. She is the Director of Innovation at the Female Quotient. FQ is an equality services company that provides thought leadership platforms for women and develops solutions for organizations committed to closing the gender gap in the workplace.
And we also have 35-year-old Canva founder, Melanie Perkins, who got rejected by 100 VCs. Now her $26 billion design startup, which Canva's kind of a competitor to like an Adobe design, is ready to take on Microsoft and Google. Perkins, who's Australian, founded the design platform with zero Silicon Valley connections, and it's now the world's most valuable startup founded and led by a woman.
And finally, the NBA hired Paramount Plus Senior VP of Consumer Marketing and Streaming, Ms. Tammy Hanault, as their Chief Marketing Officer. And Laura Kavanaugh will be the first woman to lead the New York City Fire Department. Shout out to all of the women that this week made it into our Her Voice segment. And we got to move real quick to disability Twitter. I think we have some interesting ones this week. You first.
Yeah, I love this first one. So it's Being Me 420, and it's a picture that says, "I'm too clumsy to be around fragile masculinity," as a coffee cup, which we all need. And it says, "This is absolutely perfect. Hashtag HEDS, hashtag disability Twitter, hashtag AUDHD."
Yeah, and this one here is not so much of a mystery, but we understand that people in the disability community are not employed in numbers that we can brag about. But we actually found a story this week around employment in the disability community, and it was a story dropped by Andrew Pulrang, ANDREW, Pull, PULRANG, Andrew Pulrang. He dropped a story on Forbes titled, "Why is the employment gap for people with disabilities so consistently wide?" The one thing that I want to mention in that is that there is a tiny morsel of good news in the article. The uptick in employment within the community was a little bit higher over the last month or so, and so that we want to applaud.
Yes, absolutely. Andrew is an amazing founder of the Crypto Vote hashtag, in fact. Last but not least, we have Slykers at Slykers8, Slykers 8, the number 8. Love out to all of the humans in constant chronic pain. Most people have no idea the mental and emotional discipline it takes to live like this. I love you, I see you, I honor you, and your pain and your survival. Hashtag disability Twitter.
Marching towards the holiday season, we have just a few more weeks, and for all of our listeners, just know that Julie and I have curated some really good interviews to end the year. But we'll be back next week live and direct. We close reminding each and every one of you to share the pod with your digital tribe and find your voice. Be a better human. Let's create better culture, better teams, and workplaces. For now, Jay and I are ghosts.
See ya.
Everything is changing fast in talent acquisition, and keeping yourself up to date with the latest thinking, technology, and best practice is a challenge in itself. I'm Matt Alder, host of the Recruiting Future podcast, the show that gives you weekly insights, inspiring stories, and cutting-edge thinking from practitioners who are at the front line of talent acquisition. Recruiting Future is available wherever you listen to your podcasts.